and we move at light speed. Last of a dying breed, my Akis move at light speed.
I can feel eyes on me everywhere I go. Not paranoid or conceited, but
If an underground organism of unfathomable size were unearthed in the United States, you might expect widespread panic at the horrifying discovery, or expect the US government to block off the cosmic terror from civilians. You might not expect the entity to be turned into a theme park marketed towards all ages. But that's what happened with the thankfully fictional Mystery Flesh Pit National Park. The name given to a creature of indeterminate size and origin that was nonetheless turned into a tourist attraction. Mystery Flesh Pit is an ongoing multimedia narrative project by creator Trevor Roberts, who you can follow and support in the links below. The story of the pit is told through flyers, advertisements, and posters that rebrand the horrifying life form as a relaxing family getaway. And it's this upbeat language around something so blatantly terrifying that makes the Mystery Flesh Pit project so amusing and so unsettling. Just the sort of thing to cover at this spooky time of year. But since venturing into the darkness of an unknown organism is a little frightening to do on one's own, Edge will be joining me for this entry. He makes great content about prehistoric life, unique modern animals, and bizarre cryptids, so he's just the person to help investigate this mysterious organism. Now let's begin our descent.
Unearthed accidentally in the early 1970s, the Mystery Flesh Pit, also known as the Permian Basin superorganism, is located in West Texas. Discovered by oil workers, the first tours of the pit were given by James Jackson, a small-time oil man and showman. The Mystery Flesh Pit was then further studied and reinforced by Anodyne Inc., a deep mining corporation who opened the park as a tourist attraction in 1976, with assurances it was perfectly safe. We know how corporations are. In selling the park to the public, Anodyne downplayed the horrifying nature of the pit itself, creating a friendly cartoon mascot, Caver Coop, who assured families the pit was nothing to be afraid of. The attraction was later absorbed into the national park system in the early 1980s, which led to the Permian Basin superorganism becoming further normalized. Surprising absolutely no one, thousands of tourists regularly exploring the inside of an unknown organism would eventually prove to be a bad idea, as the infamous 2007 disaster would prove. But that's a story we'll get to later.
For now, let's try to piece together the material the author has given us to try and understand the pit's biology. Like so many aspects of the pit, the more visceral reality of the organism was glossed over with clinical language by the professionals who first studied it. Since an organism of this size defied conventional science, numerous new disciplines were founded to help understand it. Geobiology is the term used for how the organism interacts with its environment. Looking at this early map, you can see the life form possesses muscular, skeletal, nervous, limbic, and vascular systems similar to traditional life, at least on the top layers. This cross-section of the pit, however, might just be a small fragment of a larger, more complex organism. How large? Data collected from a series of boreholes, shown in this diagram, suggests that in some places the organism extends over 30 kilometers below the Earth's surface. For reference, the Marianas Trench is only 11 kilometers deep. Indeed, the author suggests that the pit may well extend into the Earth's mantle, with some of the imaginary scientists implying that the organism may be native to the interior of the planet, having merely surfaced to the upper tectonic plates for unknown reasons. And despite public assurances to the contrary, there's evidence that people working behind the scenes long understood the superorganism to be dangerous. At one point in this fictional alternate history, the US government launched an investigation into the feasibility of using nuclear weapons to kill the life form. Although only the cover of this report was ever photographed, the conclusion seemed to be a resounding no. What made the Permian Basin superorganism so potentially catastrophic? The answers may lie deeper within.
In the early days of the pit, a mission called Project Freefall was planned to chart the organism to a greater depth than ever before. A joint effort between the US government and Russian scientists, the expedition involved a 6-person team lowered into the pit via specialized vehicle. Over a period of 2 weeks, the pod descended down the dark, wet, scooshy pit, reaching regions that had never been explored before. At last, the probe drilled through a dense layer of lower cartilage and entered an unknown region of blue tissue. A single-person pod was lowered into this opening. The Russian pilot described a reflective and prismatic environment, of which we only have a single image from this onboard computer. When the pod was raised back to the surface, it was heavily damaged, and the pilot was missing. The researchers concluded an attack from an unknown organism was the likely cause. Project Freefall makes it clear that the organic section of the mystery flesh pit is merely a portion of the life form, and other regions are unlike anything in the natural world. It also made it clear people aren't alone in the pit.
Even above the deeper layers, which weren't available to the public, hostile wildlife was frequently encountered. Large crustacean-like organisms were spotted as early as the first explorations, which this early sketch shows. In typical mystery flesh pit fashion, however, the corporate higher-ups turned these terrifying life forms into part of the marketing. Wildlife safety brochures were handed out to visitors, explaining the exciting anatomical fauna that dwelled in the pit, and how to avoid getting eaten. At the foundation of the pit's ecosystem, playing a role similar to bacteria in the bodies of regular-sized animals, were macrobacteria. Unlike regular bacteria you can only spot under a microscope, macrobacteria were multicellular Goliaths that could reach lengths of 12 feet or 4 meters across. This educational chart produced by the Park Services showcases the various types of macrobacteria and the other bizarre species that dwell in this imaginary Permian Basin superorganism. We won't be able to cover them all, but one notable species is the mesogaleal tridecapod, an insect-like organism that gets its name from its 13 legs, as this faded, wild about nature infographic will tell you. These pseudovertebrates are almost the size of humans and aren't technically vampires, as this guide will assure you, although they do feed off the pit and look like something out of my nightmares. In other areas of the pit, there were sightings of other more dangerous species, and even rumors of human-like life forms called merrowfolk, which Anodyne Inc. strongly denied. They maintained the mystery flesh pit was just like any other national park, and anyone who mysteriously vanished just didn't read their brochure carefully enough.
With the Permian Basin superorganism so hostile to human life, excavating it was a challenge. A challenge that began with finding people to staff it. As this oddly hilarious park ranger recruitment bulletin suggests, however, with the right benefits and incentives, Anodyne Inc. was in fact able to find people willing to enlist in the Mystery Flesh Pit Park Ranger program. What kinds of jobs did this entail? Well, why not become a park trail engineer? This anxiety-inducing position involved using compact stent frames and other highly specialized tools to create new pathways within the pit. To be a park trail engineer required extensive knowledge of caving, geology, and macrobiology, as attacks from local wildlife were apparently common. For personal protection, the laser scope anatomical environmental multi-tool was the most reliable defense. Intended to blast new paths within the mystery flesh pit, this portable tool, an example of which is on display here, was frequently used to ward off aggressive life forms. To more safely traverse the pit's interior, Anodyne Inc. developed the Internal Anatomy Vehicle, or IAV, a vehicle that could traverse the slickest and steepest of routes. Its maneuverability came in part from a rotating mechanical joint that connected the front of the vehicle to the midsection. As tourism increased, the larger Ventarial Environment Excursion Vehicle was developed, which we know from schematics used a set of twin counter-oriented screws for propulsion. These safari vessels could seat up to 8 park guests and take them deep into the pits with supposed safety.
Supposed being the key word here, as a mock-up of an incident report tells us that vehicles were bent, melted, crushed, dented, or dissolved at least on some occasions. Maybe traversing the unknown depths of a giant organism isn't a good idea after all. Well, as Caver Dave might say, that's not the right attitude for exploring the underground. For adventurous park guests, the opportunity of camping on natural, unreinforced trails was possible with the interventarial tent, shown here in this diagram. Unlike traditional tents, this collapsible, multi-sided device could endure the crushing shifts and deadly wildlife of the pit while campers slept, at least most of the time. When things went wrong, emergency trail phones were one way to reach the park staff. Called lighthouses by seasoned hikers, these subterranean telecommunication devices were highly advanced for the 1970s. And indeed, the study of the Permian Basin superorganism led to numerous technological breakthroughs.
One of many lucrative results from the development of the fictional pit were tremendous advances in the field of computer science. In the early 1980s, Anodyne began to release computers made of nervous tissue taken from the Permian Basin superorganism. With 4 terabytes of organic tissue storage memory, these machines were extremely popular. An even more well-known product exported from the mystery flesh pit was amniotic ballast, a miraculous fluid from deep within the pit, branded as Vita Salve in advertisements such as this one. The product could cure various illnesses and was almost certainly safe to use. But the most notable service Anodyne offered was access to the mystery flesh pit itself. Aside from hiking, tourists paid for access to the amniotic thermal springs. The springs had strong effects on visitors who bathed in them, including making their skin healthier and giving them a euphoric sensation, as long as they could take their mind off the fact they were bathing in an unknown liquid. The true focus of the pit for most visitors, however, was the lower visitor center, a gateway into the deep that took 8 years to construct, with restrooms, a gift shop, and even restaurants. The lower visitor center was the hub of the national park. Was it a good idea to suspend a several-ton building on steel cables in the middle of the pit? Anodyne Inc. soon found out.
At last, we've come to the 2007 disaster and all that follows. On July 4th, 2007, due to Anodyne's negligence, something as simple as heavy rain and a faulty water pump caused a section of the pit to flood to unsafe levels. The result was a catastrophe most had never imagined. The Permian Basin superorganism began to wake up. Imagine waking up from a long nap to find hundreds of tiny bugs had built a miniature hotel in your throat. You'd be pretty mad. At 9:52 p.m., the lifeform began a choking response due to the flooding, causing the entire lower visitor center to be crushed and swallowed deeper into its gullet. But this was just the beginning. According to an incident report, the creature then started to surface, with people living all around West Texas witnessing limbs of the superorganism rising from the ground, the scale of which is captured in this impressionistic painting from a survivor. And then, the creature returned to its slumber, likely lulled back to sleep by a mysterious contingency measure redacted from the incident report. In the wake of the disaster, Anodyne Inc. was dissolved, and the park was finally closed to the public, with people perhaps finally realizing that hiking inside a giant creature isn't such a good idea after all. The author imagines that the region around the pit has now become a ghost town, but behind fences, some are still monitoring it. In the present of this alternate timeline, the Permian Basin superorganism is now kept under constant surveillance. But who knows when it might awaken once more. There's a lot more lurking in the pit you can read about online.